podcast. I am your host, Khaled Abdallah, and I'm joined once again by my good friend, Naufil Mulla. How you doing today, man?
I'm good, man. It's Friday. Happy Friday.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. So on today's episode, we will be discussing the second half of the Patriots Dynasty documentary. So a couple weeks back, or maybe a month or so back, we did the first 4 episodes of the documentary. We had some burning questions from each of the episodes. We talked about some of the legacies and questions that have come out of each episode. And just to refresh your memory, Naufil is a Boston sports fan, having grown up in the New England area in Boston in the 80s. He has since moved to Texas and I guess become more of a Cowboys fan, but you never forget your roots.
Nope.
So we'll just go through each episode. I'll describe the title, the quick synopsis, what it's about, and then we'll dive into the questions. So we'll start off with episode 5, and the title is Torn. The synopsis: Brady struggles with his impermanence after a catastrophic injury. Belichick faces a test of his leadership and loyalty. So this episode is primarily about Tom Brady's ACL injury in, I believe, 2008, where he tears his ACL week 1, shortly after losing to the New York Giants in that legendary Super Bowl. And things go a little sideways for the Patriots. They miss the playoffs, things like that. We get introduced to Alex Guerrero for the first time. We learn a little bit about Belichick's overall player philosophy, where everyone is expendable, even the quarterback who's not quite the GOAT just yet, but he's getting there. And there's a couple other themes that have come up through, from this episode, I think, that have a long-term impact on the Patriots and Tom Brady. But the first question I have for you is, do the Patriots not repeat, but do they actually win the Super Bowl if Brady doesn't tear his ACL week 1?
Great question. Wow, we're starting off with a tough one right away. So it's crazy to think that that has been 16 years ago. So I still remember it as if it was yesterday. Week 1 against the Kansas City Chiefs, and he's out for the year. Basically, by the end of that, I think week or even that game, they basically declare that he's out. And so it's tough to say because I personally think that 07 team was strong. It was the undefeated team. They lost to the Giants. But in many respects, I think that 08 team probably could have been even stronger because you'd have Randy Moss for a second year, right? Now he knows any kinks that have been worked out with the offense. He basically, got the defense brought back many players. They didn't lose many. It's tough to say. I mean, when you fast forward to who actually won the Super Bowl that year, I do believe it was the Pittsburgh Steelers over the Arizona Cardinals. So, New England owned Pittsburgh, right? It wasn't like it was a Colts team that had beaten them. It's tough to say. I don't think I can go out on a limb and say they would have won it. I definitely think they would have made the playoffs, right? But you do see a little bit of that Belichick philosophy, like, hey, you know what? He's out. We brought in Matt Castle. Matt Castle wins 11 games. And so at that time, people were like, I don't want to get ahead, but is Brady a system quarterback or is it Brady or Belichick? Because, Matt Castle won 11 games. It wasn't enough to make the playoffs, but that was the tiebreaker. They lost on a tiebreaker, right? It wasn't as if he didn't do a good job. So I do think they would have done better with Brady. They would have absolutely made the playoffs, maybe 12-4, 13-3, which would have been enough to get him in there. Whether or not they go on to win, tough to say, because that was also a pretty good Pittsburgh Steelers team. And they would have had a lot of revenge as well because the Patriots had beaten them in the past. So, toss up. I will say if the Patriots got to the Super Bowl that year, I don't see Kurt Warner and the Cardinals that year beating them. So, toss up to say, but let's just go with they would have made the playoffs, but whether or not they win the Super Bowl, I don't know. But they would have had a better year with Brady than with Matt Castle. I can say that with confidence.
Yeah, for sure. I don't think I'm going out on a limb by saying they would have won the Super Bowl because the year before they are, one helmet catch away from beating the Giants, winning that Super Bowl, going 18-0, whatever. Yep. I think they would have done it the next year, or 19-0, sorry.
Sure.
I think they would not have gone 19-0, but they definitely would have won the Super Bowl. They were, again, 10-6 or whatever, 11-5 with Matt Castle. Brady's probably worth 4 games more than that. They talked about Matt Castle being a little more athletic, so you add a different dimension to the offense, but you're not going to tell me that at any point in his life, Matt Castle was a better quarterback than Tom Brady. So I don't think I'm going out on a limb. You hinted at something. I know we said 2 questions per episode, but you said Tom Brady, there was talk about him being system QB. Maybe just a brief answer, but did you buy some of that? Did you believe it?
In 2008? A little bit, to be honest, because again, the only data point we would have had is can the Patriots still win without Tom Brady? And Bill Belichick for that season proved that they could. Winning 11 games without Tom Brady, goes a long way. Now, it would have been interesting to see had they made the playoffs. Again, in my opinion, Tom Brady always elevated his game in the playoffs, right? So other than that 16-0 season, most of their seasons were 11-5, 12-4. They did have a 13-3 season, but, other than that 16-0 season, they were not winning 14, 15 games a year. They were in that 11, 12 game. But then in the playoffs, like I said, first 9 games undefeated, and then lost to Denver, of course. So yeah, I do think there was some talk about that, but I'm like, you know what? One season doesn't make a case, right? So I thought it was interesting to see, but then I think the question would have been if any point in that year, Khalid, if Tom Brady was able to play, he would have played, right? He clearly would have been in that thing. But I do think the Belichick supporters were probably saying, hey, it's Belichick, not Brady. And I know later on in this episode, we'll get to that burning question of who it is, but I think that was an argument for the Belichick supporters for sure that year.
Yeah, it was definitely point on the board. Belichick, you didn't make the playoffs, but you still went,
Yep.
You won 11 games with a guy that hadn't started a game since high school.
Correct.
So it was almost like you could plug in anybody besides
Sure.
any average quarterback in the NFL, and you're making the Super Bowl, you're doing all that stuff.
Yep.
As a Brady hater, I was like, yeah, it's Belichick.
Yep.
It's not Tom Brady.
Absolutely.
At the time. So final question for this episode. At this point, did you think that the dynasty was over? Did you think, I know it was an ACL, it's not, the most catastrophic injury, but did you think the run was over at this point?
So I would say I did think that Tom Brady coming back from that was past his prime. So I want to clarify that by saying that, yeah, I mean, he was, anytime you have that kind of an injury, we saw it with Drew Bledsoe, right? And that was the discussion we had in the last episode, right? About that's why Tom Brady was drafted, because we all felt Drew Bledsoe was on his end. Robert Kraft still believed Drew Bledsoe had it. That's why he paid him $100 million. Robert Kraft probably still believed Tom Brady had it, but I think Belichick probably started to realize that he's not going to be the same quarterback that he was. Whether the dynasty was over or not, I think maybe they may have had one run. And the reason I say that is Tom Brady in 2006 had that heartbreaking loss, right, to the Colts, where he blew an 18-point lead in the NFC Championship. Tom Brady was always the revenge guy, right? He comes back, wins 18 games in a row before losing the Super Bowl. I felt that coming back in 2009 from that injury, if he wasn't limited physically, that he may have put another run in there. But I was definitely thinking one more run maybe at the end, not 3 more runs as he did in the 2010s. So
yeah,
past the prime, at best, maybe they make and win one more Super Bowl, but that's about it. I really thought his clock was ticking, and maybe 2 more years tops, but not more than that, for sure.
For sure. And I think one of the important things that they talk about in this episode was the introduction of Alex Guerrero, the fitness guru that we talk more about in a later episode. But I think it's pretty much a fact that I think this injury was the catalyst to Brady being able to play until he was 45, 46 years old, because he started doing things a little more unorthodox, taking his body and things like that more seriously, probably spending more money, more time on his body. So I think it was obviously a setback, but I think it was a net positive for him.
Pliability, right? The first time I ever heard about that word, and that's all to Alex Guerrero. I think Brady even said himself, he's like, this guy took away the pain, right? And no one had ever done that. And keep in mind, Brady's been playing football his whole career, right? His whole life, rather. At the high school level, at the college level. Granted, he probably didn't get hurt as much as in the younger days, but in New England, he had pain for 7 years, since he started. This guy took away the pain, so he's like, you're my guy.
Yeah, and this was a big talking point in, I believe, episode 9. So the next episode was called At All Costs. This was basically the Aaron Hernandez episode. So easily the most serious, most tragic, most depressing episode of the bunch.
Sure.
The synopsis is: facing a crossroads, the Patriots draft Rob Gronkowski and Aaron Hernandez, but tragedy strikes and a murder investigation unfolds. So this was kind of the start of Patriots 2.0. At this point, a lot of the vets from the first run are gone. They draft guys like Gronk, Hernandez, Devin McCourty. And this episode dives into a lot of the insane things that were happening behind the scenes with Aaron Hernandez. They go into his history growing up in New Haven, his history in Florida, where he's just escaping consequences. And there's a lot of red flags that are coming up the whole way through. And I think, essentially this episode is what starts the Bill Belichick villain turn in this documentary series where they kind of lay the blame at Belichick's feet for not wanting to cut Aaron Hernandez when he was wilding out, and B, not agreeing to trade him because Aaron Hernandez was reportedly asking for a trade to the West Coast so he could escape some of the demons from his past. The other thing that came up was the attachment that Robert Kraft had to Aaron Hernandez, where he just absolutely loved Aaron Hernandez like a son, offered to pay for his lawyer, was basically praying that he wasn't guilty despite all the evidence to the contrary. So the question I have for you is, what's up with Robert Kraft? Why does he get so attached to these guys? And to me, it's a character flaw. I don't know how you see it, but why is this happening to him? Why does he do that?
It absolutely is a character flaw, because if we remember from the previous podcast, you asked me, what did Robert Kraft do that made the Patriots successful? And I said he ran it like a business. I gave you the Jerry Jones example, right? And so being attached to your players is rule number one of how not to run a business, right? Every player is expendable. Every player is a number. It's a value, an asset, a liability. No emotions involved. And while that's cutthroat, that's business. And Robert Kraft built this empire off that. But if you notice, he had a couple of big lapses, right? Paying Drew Bledsoe $100 million. That was purely emotional, right? And then this Aaron Hernandez thing as well. So yeah, I view it as a character flaw, but I also view it on the flip side as, no matter how much of a businessman he is, at the end of the day, he still is a human, right? He's still going to have likes, dislikes, right? And not to get ahead, but as we get later on, and even post that, clearly, he had a view on Bill Belichick, right? Which may have been love at the beginning, not so much. But before I jump into more, I want to also say, yes, agreed. That was crazy what Belichick did. But to me, some blame also has to be given to Urban Meyer, right? At his most vulnerable
absolutely.
in Aaron Hernandez as a teenager, right? And then a young 20-something at Florida. Those signs were exhibited there. It's not like Aaron Hernandez showed up in New England and suddenly became this crazy person. Those signs were there, as you alluded to, in Florida, and he always got away with it. And who enabled that? Urban Meyer, the head coach. So he was essentially, letting Hernandez think that, hey, I can get away with this. He learned that in college, the most formative experience or time for anybody. And then he comes to New England thinking it's going to be more of the same, and it was. But yeah, what really did break my heart is Aaron Hernandez basically requesting, as you mentioned, a trade to the other coast too. It's not like he's saying, hey, I want to get out of New England. Because if you traded him to the Giants or the Jets, he would still be in proximity to Connecticut, right? He was saying, I want to get the far as possible away from this team.
He wanted to go to Seattle.
He said, Seattle, right? Literally the farthest flight away for his own good. And Belichick made a business decision, right? Where, no, we're not going to do that. When he clearly could have. He still had Gronk, right? We didn't know Gronk would become the super all-world, future Hall of Famer that he became. But at the same time, we knew he was really good, right? They spent a pretty, early draft pick on him. But yeah, just really tragic. Belichick gets some of the blame. I think Urban Meyer has got some of the blame. And then even Kraft, we don't really ever find out. But was it Kraft that said, no, we're not going to trade him because he liked him so much? If that's the case, Kraft also knew there were issues as well. So maybe even if that's the case, it's never talked about. We can expound on that. Maybe some of the blame goes to Kraft to be like, look, this guy is asking for a trade. He's in a bad situation. You have the right to overrule your coach, right? I mean, you're the owner of the team, right? And so that none of that happened. So like everything that could have gone wrong in the perfect storm went wrong. And this is just really sad how that story ends. Both you and I are fathers of girls. He had a young girl as well. And not justifying anything about Aaron Hernandez. He was a bad guy. He deserved to be in jail for the rest of his life. But then, to commit suicide and kill himself just shows there was a lot wrong with him mentally that we just could never get to.
Yeah, exactly. I think he had a lot of demons, and I don't think either of us are qualified to speak on that part of it, at least.
Absolutely.
But I think what was really crazy to me about this episode was just how everyone was seeing it happen in real time. It's like watching a car crash in slow motion. They're like, when I think Brandon Lloyd came over, they were like, don't go out with, I think they called him Chico was his nickname. They're like, don't go out with Aaron Hernandez. You never know where you're going to end up. And it was one of those things where it's an open secret. Everyone knows what he's up to, at least to some degree. And they're either turning a blind eye because he's so good at football, which we see time and time again, which is, I think, one of the tragedies of pro and college sports, is that these things are overlooked. There's like that famous anonymous quote, I forgot what GM it was. And they said, we would draft Hannibal Lecter if he ran a 4.2 40. And, it's based on what we know of Aaron Hernandez, he was essentially a serial killer, which is crazy to think about. But the question I have for you is, I know we talked about the blame going on Robert Kraft and things like that. And I know ultimately Aaron Hernandez is responsible for his actions, but does Bill Belichick not get enough flack for the decisions that he made or didn't make here?
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, to be fair, I would answer it this way. I think Bill Belichick doesn't get enough blame for that, but I also want to say he shouldn't get all the blame. I do think it's sort of that kind of double-edged sword in that regard. But yeah, it's essentially everybody just said, oh, it's Aaron Hernandez's fault, right? Because again, it's easy to have him as a scapegoat because he's the one that was in jail. He's the one that killed himself. But yeah, I mean, if you look back, Belichick deserves a big part of that, right? For being the guy to say no to him, for trading him. But again, Urban Meyer, Robert Kraft also deserve, a big part, whether it's equal or not. Point is, they all three, I think, deserve blame. So I think if you're going to say that Belichick deserves more blame, I agree with that. But I don't think we should let Urban Meyer or Robert Kraft off the hook either. I think all three deserve some part, whether it's equal or not. That's debatable, but for sure. And none of them really got any blame. I mean, think about it. Urban Meyer still coaches, right? It took him more shadiness that he did at Jacksonville and then Ohio State, etc. And now, who knows? He may get another coaching job. I hope not. But it seems like this guy is a serial kind of shady character, and yet keeps getting coaching jobs because he can win a few games, right? Kraft is a different story. Obviously, he's the owner of the Patriots, but this is just another example of when Kraft let emotion get involved, when he probably should have made a business decision and been like, look, if this guy doesn't want to play here and he's not going to produce, we should trade him. And especially when you had Gronk. But I think it was tough at the time to make that decision because in the first two seasons when he was there, he actually had better numbers than Gronk, right? He had that Super Bowl touchdown.
Yeah, he was incredible.
Had more catches.
Yeah.
He was probably the one people thought would have the higher potential. That makes it even more tragic what happened, right? He was just not he was not a bench warmer. He was a full-blown starter who probably would have earned that title over Gronk had he played, right? And still remain clean.
Yeah. Yeah, I think there's plenty of blame to go around. I'm sure there's moments in his life that maybe he could have gone another direction had he faced some consequences early on. But again, we'll never know. And, just a sad story for everyone involved. That definitely goes well beyond the scope of football and everything else. So the next episode is episode 7. It's called Under Pressure. The synopsis is envy and jealousy take root, putting Brady and the Patriots at the center of a 2-year media spectacle known as Deflategate. So this episode is basically about most fans getting sick and tired of the Patriots always winning. This leads to the Deflategate, which comes out of the 2015 AFC title game, where the Indianapolis Colts accused the Patriots and Brady, specifically Brady, of doctoring the football so he can, have a better grip, whatever it is. During this episode, Bill Belichick throws Tom Brady under the bus a little bit by disavowing any knowledge of, what's happening, which I don't believe. And also, it kind of wraps up on kind of a high note with Malcolm Butler making possibly the most clutch defensive play in Super Bowl history. I still think the James Harrison one was probably more exciting because of how insane it was. But in terms of clutch and importance and all that, I don't think it's hard to argue against that being the most clutch play. So this episode is basically about Deflategate. And the question is, do you think it really did anything to help Tom Brady by deflating these footballs? And do you think he actually was guilty of this quote unquote crime of deflating the footballs?
So great question. I mean, this is where my answer some people may accuse me of being a self-hating Patriots fan. I will say this. Let me start by this. I do think it was warranted to have that investigation, right? Because clearly there was something going on, right? There was something going on. And I do think Belichick knew about it. I think Brady knew about it. So anybody to say they didn't, they're just flat out lying. Whether or not it caused an unfair or undue advantage, I think compared to Spygate, no, it was tame. I mean, in Spygate, you're literally taping the plays and the signals of the opposing team. To me, that was much more egregious and probably deserved more blame. With Brady's case, getting the 4 games, I thought that was fair. I don't think that was too harsh or too lenient. I think it was just the right amount. What's crazy, and I'm so glad that episode happened, is I totally forgot that happened in the like you said, the 2015 AFC Championship, technically the 2014 season, but it was in January 2015. But then he was actually suspended, but then a judge kicked it out. So Brady got to play the entire 2015 season. And then in 2016, that's when he missed the first 4 games. So to your point, like you said, it went over 2 years, but the punishment actually didn't happen until an entire season where he got to play went by. So that was always weird to me. I thought it literally happened the next season, but it didn't because of all the legalese.
I had the same
Yeah,
thought
I
too.
was like, wait,
When I was
timing's
looking at
off.
the football reference, I was like,
Absolutely.
yeah, okay.
But that being said, no,
Yeah.
absolutely. I think it was appropriate. I think the 4 games was fine. This is just another thing, right? Because you had Spygate, now you had Deflategate. It's just another thing for those that want to say that those Super Bowls need an asterisk. It gives them that feather in their cap. And at the end of the day, it was in the AFC Championship. This wasn't week 1, right? So this was literally in a game where the Patriots didn't even need to do this, right? They were going to win anyway, right? They were going to win that game regardless of if he deflated the balls or not. They probably wouldn't have won 41-7, but maybe they win by 10 or 15 or whatever. So why do it? It begs the question, why do it? And then it makes you wonder also how long had he been doing it for? So either way, I do think there was a crime committed. You may not have been violating the letter of the law, but the spirit of the game was definitely it. But like I said, I mean, if people are saying this is the biggest deal ever, I'm like, no, I think Spygate was much worse because it gave you an unfair advantage for sure. So I think it was wrapped up. Cost a lot of taxpayer money, which is just another thing we didn't need. But at the end of the day, I think it just gave Brady another point to be like, I'm going to come back with a vengeance. And as we'll get into in a few minutes,
another chip on the shoulder.
He did just that.
Yeah, that's definitely on the in the next episode. But so I'm gonna zag a little bit on you. I don't think this was a thing at all. I think that quarterbacks have a preference. I think just like anything else, they have specific needs and preferences when it comes to their equipment. They want their helmet a certain way, their pads, whatever, their jersey. So I'm not going to compare, my football exploits to Tom Brady. But growing up, there was a quarterback that I would play with in flag football tournaments and things like that who preferred a slightly deflated ball because it was easier for him to grip. And I think Tom Brady was the same way. I think, and you see some of the things that these equipment departments do, where they're like caking the ball in mud and they're doing sandpaper and all kinds of weird things to treat the ball so it's not like slick coming out of the box. And I think this was exactly the same thing. I think it was basically an equipment preference that Tom Brady had that had very little impact on the result of the game. It was just something that he felt more comfortable doing. To me, it's like he used to wear like scuba suits under his pads in freezing cold weather. It's just something that he liked to do. So maybe technically, but PSI and science and all that, maybe it's like technically against the rules. But to me, it doesn't have enough of a material impact on the result of the game for it to have been worthy of even a 1-game suspension. I think it was just a firestorm. It was right after the Aaron Hernandez situation. It was not that far removed from Spygate. And people were just like, oh, we have something else to nail these guys on, even if it's mostly wild speculation.
That's fair. That's fair.
My theory was that this was the NFL getting back at the Patriots for mishandling the Aaron Hernandez situation and letting it escalate to the level where he's murdering people and the headline says NFL star murders, blah, blah, blah. And it's just a huge stain on the reputation of the league. What do you think about that? That
actually is very interesting. I actually will give you credit for that because I do remember it wasn't talked about in the documentary, but I distinctly remember reading Robert Kraft and Roger Goodell, billionaire buddies, right? They basically, best of friends, etc. After the Aaron Hernandez thing, there was a bit of a little, tension between the two. So I do remember reading an article, again, I'll have to pull it back up, but yeah, for sure, Roger Goodell was furious, and I think Roger Goodell, who else could he blame? He's going to blame the owner, right? So yeah, I can definitely see that. It was right off the heels, as you mentioned, of that, and it's like, hey, look, you messed up with with Aaron Hernandez, Robert Kraft, you messed up. I can't punish you for that because, the guy's in jail. I can't punish you for that. But any little thing I find, I'm going to make it into a mountain. And that's probably what he did. Yeah, I agree with that. And then at the same time, though, he probably is like, I can't suspend him for more than 4 games because then people will think I'm ludicrous, right? So I think he gave him the maximum penalty that he thought would, not cause chaos and his whole fan base to turn against him. But I agree with your explanation. I do think, at the end of the day, people do it all the time, right? I mean, even in baseball, you guys got doing, they've obviously put rules in after that, but spitballs, curveballs, etc. People do that all the time, and it's only really affecting the quarterback throwing, right? The receiver still has to catch it, right? So let's say the receiver actually doesn't like catching balls that are a little deflated. It's going to affect him because the pass is between a quarterback. And the other thing is, it doesn't affect anybody on defense because the football is the quarterback of the other team. So yeah, no, I agree with that. I mean, and we know Roger Goodell. It's not putting it past Roger Goodell to have vendettas against people. He clearly does. And even guys that used to be his best buddies like Robert Kraft. If you make my brand and my reputation, as he says, protect the shield, right? That's his big thing. Then you're going to get it no matter who you are. And I think for sure I give credence to that theory. I think it makes sense.
Mm-hmm. And they hinted at that the other NFL owners thought that they were lenient on the Patriots for Spygate. So this was just another chance to get at them. Next episode 8, is called Score to Settle. So the synopsis says, with Jimmy Garoppolo nipping at his heels and a coach that may not have his back, Brady stages one of the greatest comebacks in sports history. So the last episode with Belichick throwing Tom Brady under the bus for Spygate or for Deflategate was, I think, one of the first fissures in their relationship, some of the cracks in that Patriots armor. So in this episode, they talk about drafting Jimmy Garoppolo in 2014. And it's another anti-Bill Belichick episode by making it look like it was all his idea to draft a new quarterback. And just more anti-Belichick stuff about him being a hard ass and blah, blah, blah. And the focus of the episode was the 2017 Super Bowl win against the Atlanta Falcons, the famous 28-3 game. But before we get to the game itself, what did you think of the decision to draft Jimmy Garoppolo? Because I looked back, and this is not the first time they used a somewhat high pick on a quarterback. They drafted Kevin O'Connell in the 3rd round in 2008. They drafted Ryan Mallett in the 3rd round in 2011. They also drafted Jacoby Brissett a couple years later in the 3rd round, 2016. But of course, Jimmy G was a 2nd round pick. So, obviously higher pick than the 3rd round. But was it as big of a deal? And was it just because Jimmy Garoppolo was really handsome? That's how Brady felt.
It's funny you say that, right? I mean, at the time, I don't think he was married to Giselle. I know he was probably dating or whatnot. So yeah, I mean, that's funny. It may be. I mean, Jimmy Garoppolo definitely gave him a run for his money in that department. But I think you're right. That's a really good point you bring up, that this was not the first time, right? Granted, it was the first time they used the 2nd round pick, but at the end of the day, Tom Brady has to understand he's not going to be around forever, right? Alex Guerrero or no Alex Guerrero, there is going to be a time when Tom Brady is going to retire, and the Patriots probably should start planning for that. I think for Brady, he felt this may have been a little too soon, right? A little, maybe he's like, look, I just won, the Super Bowl, the year before, right? Or maybe 2 years before. But the point is, I'm still competing, right? I think the year after the Seahawks Super Bowl, they lost in the AFC Championship to Denver. So clearly, it wasn't like they were missing the playoffs. They were getting to that championship game or Super Bowl consistently after Brady's second comeback, if you want to call it. So yeah, he was probably frustrated. But at the same time, Brady should not be upset because Brady himself, even though he was a 6th round pick, was drafted while Drew Bledsoe just got a $100 million contract. So clearly, you got to plan for that, right? And Belichick is not wrong for maybe drafting Jimmy Garoppolo, not Guerrero, Jimmy Garoppolo. But I also think, yes, it may have been Bill Belichick's decision, but at the end of the day, Robert Kraft knew about it. Robert Kraft was not unaware that they were doing this, right? I think every draft pick that Bill Belichick made, Robert Kraft, while he may not have to sign or bless or co-sign, had to be made aware of it. And so, again, it goes back to, like you said, the last half of these episodes were very much agenda-based, I think, in trying to drive Bill Belichick as some
100%.
Evil mastermind, right? Which kind of begs the question, was Robert Kraft involved in any of the directorial decisions? Who knows, right? But the point is...
Yes, he was. No, he was. I think he's listed as an executive producer. If not him, then at least Jonathan
Well,
Kraft.
That makes a lot of sense.
It's very much him driving. Yeah, it's very much him
100%,
driving. 100%,
yeah, because, at the end of the day, they're basically trying to give the team credit for the Patriots' success, right? Brady, Kraft, and some Belichick, but as little as possible, but all of the blame for their downfall. That's the way I view those last few episodes, and this is just another way to do that. So at the end of the day, drafting a quarterback when your current quarterback is at this point, 33, 34 years old, right, does not strike me as crazy.
Very normal.
That's what any logical coach, GM, owner would do. But I think in this regard, they were trying to draw some more into it, which we'll probably get into in the next episode or not, which leads, when they traded him, right? So my point is, if Bill Belichick is allowed to draft him, but then Bill Belichick doesn't want to trade him and he's traded him, it tells me that at the end of the day, Robert Kraft still runs the team. So if Robert Kraft did not want him to draft
100%.
Jimmy Garoppolo, they would not have drafted Jimmy Garoppolo. It's almost the same level of control that Jerry Jones has. Maybe I'm going on a limb for saying that, but the point is, I think Robert Kraft could have prevented them from drafting it. He was okay with it, and that's why it happened.
Absolutely. And I think it's not a crazy thing to, again, if you have a 35-year-old quarterback, you're going to start thinking about the future, especially Bill Belichick. He was always the guy that was going to let you go a year early versus a year late. That was always his thing. And, maybe he saw some things in the Tom Brady's tape where he was like, oh, maybe he's losing a little bit of zip or whatever it is. Whatever reasons he had, we don't know. But I think he fell in love with Jimmy Garoppolo as a prospect. He thought he would have been a great fit for them. He played well in the limited time that he was, in New England. So it made sense. And again, they always had a backup plan. They were spending third-round picks on quarterbacks, which is not something that you usually see. Like if Patrick Mahomes, if the Chiefs this year decided to draft a quarterback in the third round, it kind of raised some eyebrows. You're like, why are they doing that? It's not really a need. So it was interesting that they would always have, excuse me, that backup plan in mind. So let's jump into the game itself. This was one of the most insane football games I've ever seen from start to finish. There was a lot happening. There was the Trump angle, which they jump into in the next episode because he was in attendance. He's a good friend of Belichick and Robert Kraft. And it was the year of the underdog. It was Leicester City winning the Premier League title. It was the Cleveland Cavaliers winning the NBA title. So we thought, oh, this is the Falcons. They're going to – I think there was a baseball underdog too that might have won. The Chicago Cubs. Yes, there you go. Breaking a 100-year curse. So you're just, to me, again, a Patriots hater. I'm thinking, oh, the Falcons, they've never won a Super Bowl. They're one of the loser franchises in the NFL. It's their time. And then, of course, it all falls apart. So as you're watching that game, this is a two-part question. When did you think that the comeback was on? And was this the game that made Brady officially the GOAT? To you, to the public, what do you think?
Great question. Let me answer that second one first. To me, I think so, because this was his 5th Super Bowl, passing Joe Montana, passing Terry Bradshaw, right? Aikman, I felt he passed when he had 4, just no number of wins. There's no quarterback, right, in history with 5 Super Bowls. So just from a numbers perspective, yes. And I think the way he did it, right, the previous comeback, biggest comeback was 10 points, right? No team had ever come back for a deficit of more than 10 points. This is 25 points in the second half as well. So this wasn't like, oh, it happened in the first quarter and they had the whole game to catch up. But to me, I'll be honest, I think it's as much of a comeback as it is a choke. And I think that sometimes gets lost in translation. You are the Atlanta Falcons.
Yes, please.
You're
expand
up
on
by
this.
25 points. You have a great running game. The Patriots only have 3 timeouts. They didn't magically get 30 timeouts. You could run the ball, mix it up, do that. And they actually did in that last drive when they were only up 8, where they had that big completion. I think it was either to Tevin Coleman or to their other Devonta Freeman running back. To me, it was a colossal collapse, thinking the game was over. And let's just kind of trot our way to the finish line, going back to Aesop, tortoise and the hare, basically saying, you know what, we've reached out to this lead. We can take our foot off the pedal and relax. And I really think Scott Pioli saying that's Freddy Krueger over there for all you 80s horror film fans, he's going to come back, was the most apt analogy for that. You still had an entire fourth quarter and most of the third quarter to take, because when it became 28-3, that was in the first 5 minutes, right? They basically scored that touchdown and didn't score the rest of the game. Bad play calls, penalties, etc. And then again, the defense, right? Just not putting pressure on Brady, allowing him to do whatever he wanted to. So I feel like, blame the defense, blame the offense. You got conservative at a time you shouldn't have. And then again, when you're in field goal range with the game on the line, only up 8, you have that incredible Julio Jones catch to get them in field goal range. You take a sack, right? That's on Matt Ryan. I mean, the one thing you can't do in that situation is get sacked. He did. they didn't even kick a field goal because they're like, we're not even arranged to punt it. So yes, give credit.
Mm-hmm.
Brady in that second half was Brady, right? He proved himself what he was. He was making the throws that he wasn't making in the first half. He was getting lucky. I mean, to me, it's always interesting to get 2 touchdowns and 2 2-point conversions. That's tough. That is tough. I mean, kicking an extra point is easy. They missed an extra point actually, which forced them to have to take that 2-point conversion. But that was tough. And then of course, to me, I thought the comeback was on when it became 28 to 20. I was like, okay, they've really done this. And I'm like, I'm seeing nothing from Atlanta, right? This was after the Donta Hightower forced fumble, right? Where he the strip sack, if you want to call it.
That was
I'm like,
the moment for
oh,
me.
this is dangerous. And again, then Atlanta had that drive, got into field goal range, had to punt. And I'm like, when the Patriots got the ball back with 2 minutes to go, down 8, I'm like, they're going to score and they're going to get the 2 point. At that point, I knew that might be a lot later than most people, but no, when it was 28 to 3, no chance. Even 28 to 9, because they scored the touchdown, missed extra point. I'm like, no, they're not going to be able to score 19 points in one quarter. No, there's just not enough possessions. Even 28 to 12, I'm like, oh man, they kicked a field goal. I was actually saying, go for it. You don't have time to kick field goals. Still kicked it. But yeah, I don't know what Atlanta did. I mean, they just poor clock management, poor play calling, poor everything. And it's shocking to me that, that game was literally in their hands and they just blew it. And as soon as the Patriots won the toss, this was the old overtime rules. I'm like, oh, they're going to score a touchdown. It's over. I knew that when they won the toss. I'm like, it's over.
I remember very, very vividly. I had a Super Bowl party at my, little apartment, Philadelphia. We had a lot more people than we probably should have. I remember at that point, it's 28 to 3. I'm kind of sitting off to the side, one eye on the game, the other eye, on some 7-layer dip, and just chatting it up, having a conversation with a buddy. And then I see the strip sack, and that's one of those, that meme where you kind of lean forward in your seat, and I'm like, oh, okay. Time to put away the snacks. Enough small talk. We got to focus because something's happening here. So to me, that's when, I got concerned. And then obviously everything else that happened after that. And this deserves its own episode of a podcast because it's the legend of Kyle Shanahan, the choking, the being conservative when you should be aggressive and aggressive when you should be conservative and not running the ball and not trusting your run game and doing cute shit when you should just play smash mouth football. And I want to say at some point, if they just took 3 knees and punted every time they got the ball, maybe starting from that strip sack, they probably would have won the game. But, obviously that's a very defeatist mentality. But you get the point, right? You run a fullback dive 3 plays in a row and you win the game. But all that aside, the choking aside, Dan Quinn, Kyle Shanahan, Matt Ryan, all that stuff, to me, it ended the conversation. Brady was the GOAT. It's the end of I've kind of put my weapons down as a anti-Brady hater. I just said, it's just not worth it anymore. I'm not winning. I was defeated. I was just personally defeated. I got a little bit of revenge in the Eagles game, which is in the next episode. But it was over at that point, I think, for a lot of people. And if you were holding on to it, it was just, you're just being delusional.
And Kraft called that the sweetest one, and I'd agree. That was the sweetest. That was Goodell handing him the trophy was the most awkward trophy presentation that I've ever seen in a Super Bowl.
Yeah. I completely forgot about that point. Yeah, because that was the year he got suspended. So just delicious irony for the Boston sports fans. The next episode 9, Breaking Point. There's a lot going on here. The synopsis is tensions boil over when Belichick makes a questionable decision on the biggest stage. So this episode opens with more anti-Belichick stuff. It starts with him supporting Trump, writing that letter that Trump, he gives permission to Trump to read at a campaign stop. He kind of breaks the standards that he sets on the team of don't speak to the media, don't show any personality, blah, blah, blah. And he openly supports a very divisive presidential candidate. And it causes some fissures in the locker room. I don't know about Brady. He had a MAGA hat in his locker at one point, so I don't know if he cared about this. Then there was the whole son of a bitch thing with with Kaepernick and kneeling for the flag. Just a lot happening. And they were basically saying this is a joyless locker room. We're just here for business. They end up getting to the Super Bowl anyway. But this also talks about Alex Guerrero and the whole situation with him being banned from the team from team facilities because he's overstepping his bounds. He's giving advice contrary to the team, but Brady loves him, and that's what matters to Brady. So this was a big knock against Belichick.
Yeah.
So 2 questions from this episode. Is Alex Guerrero a snake oil salesman? And why was he so popular with the team?
Yeah, so the reason he's popular with the team is because he's Tom Brady's guy, right? Tom Brady is the personality in the locker room. Everybody loves him, right? Tom Brady basically is that leader, right? He's been there 20 years at this point almost. And so it's like, so yeah, if Tom Brady says he's good, he's good. But to be honest, like what Alex Guerrero was saying with this pliability and this diet, to be honest, it's not anything novel, right? It just so happens that it works for Tom Brady. So more than anything, I feel like Alex Guerrero probably went to many people with this kind of spiel. Some liked it, some didn't. But he hit the jackpot essentially. He won the lottery when he connected with Tom Brady, and it worked with him, right? It may not work with people, but it worked with Tom Brady, and so
Gronk
that he
too.
just grabbed onto that. So clearly he's more than just a snake oil salesman because again, whatever snake oil he's selling Tom Brady, it's working. But I think what really upset Belichick was the fact that this guy is making Belichick's hand-picked training staff look bad, right? Because these guys are not able, right, to do this with Tom Brady. They may work with others, but as soon as Tom Brady started introducing Alex to other people like Julian Edelman, Danny Amendola, some of the other players, that delegitimized Belichick's influence, I think, in the room. And Belichick is all about power, right? At the end of the day, he knows the players win the Super Bowls, but as a coach, he still wants to be the decision maker. He still wants to be consulted on things. And I think with this Alex Guerrero situation, he felt like hands were taken off the reins, right? So I think he didn't like that. And clearly that was very much another fissure you were talking about. Brady liked the guy. He wanted him on the plane. It wasn't like Alex Guerrero was stealing plays, right, and giving it to the other team. He was literally there to help the team. But I think Belichick's just like, no, this guy, every time I see this guy, I'm reminded of the fact that Tom Brady has more power over me in the locker room. And as the head coach of Belichick's ego, no player had ever done that, even from his Giants days, right? He speaks so lovingly of Lawrence Taylor, all of Lawrence Taylor's faults aside, but he felt like Lawrence Taylor, the greatest defensive man of all time, still gave that respect to Belichick, even after winning 2 Super Bowls, right? I think with Brady won 5, right? So 3 more than him. But I felt like it was definitely, I don't think he personally had anything against Alex Guerrero. What he had against was the fact that Tom Brady getting to say, hey, I'm going to do this, whether you like him or not.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and they talk a lot about this in the episode of Brady kind of spreading his wings a little bit, doing more PR stuff, doing more advertising, sponsorships, whatever it is, just finally deciding, I think at this point it had been almost 20 years, and he's like, you know what, I'm going to live the life that I have earned as the greatest quarterback of all time. And I think that Falcons Super Bowl was just it basically gave him license to do whatever he wanted. Because again, he didn't think that it was hurting the team. He was just doing his thing. And he thought that he had earned it. And, he did, to be fair. As far as Guerrero, I mean, I think it's very normal for a superstar athlete to have their own trainer. I'm sure LeBron has his own trainer or training staff that's not associated with the Lakers because he needs that focused attention. If you're an older athlete, you're going to need focused attention that, this training staff is not going to be able to give you. And you're going to spend money, your own money out of your own pockets to do this sort of thing. So I didn't think it was a huge deal. There was some stuff with the TB12 method where they have the pajamas that are supposed to help you with recovery, and the whole thing about like drink this water, this alkaline water, it's going to prevent concussion. So some of it we're like, all right, that's BS, that's snake oil. But the other stuff, the stretching, the plyometrics, the pliability, the massages, it's all kind of things that you're like, okay, it makes sense for an older athlete to do that. I feel like Tim Duncan was kind of doing the same thing where he realized, you know what, I'm going to stop lifting weights. I'm going to get leaner. So I'm able to have, more longevity. So I don't think it's anything novel. It just, again, like you said, just a power struggle. And Guerrero was just caught in the middle. And he was just a symbol of that freedom, that newfound freedom that Brady had.
Yes.
So let's get to the game. The main game that they talk about is the 2017 season, 2018 Super Bowl against the Philadelphia Eagles.
Amazing.
One of the greatest games of all time. Just an absolute barn burner of a football game that ends, I believe it was 45-37, some crazy score like that.
Crazy scoring.
41-33, yeah. And the big storyline, aside from Nick Foles and the Philly special, the big storyline on the Patriots side was that they couldn't stop a nosebleed And for some reason, Malcolm Butler, the starting cornerback, the hero of the Seahawks Super Bowl, the author of the greatest clutch play in Super Bowl history, is not on the field. I think he plays
At the
one
end,
snap on special teams the entire game. And
None.
there's no explanation as to why. He's crying before the game, all that stuff.
Okay,
What's
thank
your
you.
theory?
I was going to say, I have
Because
a
I have a
theory on this,
theory
and I
too.
actually
But
spent
please,
time thinking about it because when it happened, I was just like, he probably did, something minor that Belichick got mad. Maybe he was late to practice one day. Maybe he, said something in jest or whatever. I was thinking it was something very minor. But after watching that episode, I tried to find information online, but I just wasn't able to. Hear me out. Again, conspiracy theory, but listen to me here. That was that whole Trump episode. It started with that, right? Malcolm Butler, right? To me, he strikes me as a well-spoken, right, proud black athlete. And I personally think I could see, by the way, winning the Super Bowl, right, as everybody says, they won because of him. So, having some confidence with that. I think when that whole Belichick Trump thing happened, which, by the way, I want to back up for a second, 100% hypocritical of Bill Belichick to tell his team that you can't talk to the media and then him to do that. So as much as we say, I agree, this whole documentary was anti-Belichick, that deserved criticism, 100% of what he got for doing that, because he's basically lying out 1 year to the other people, right? Essentially saying, I can do this because I'm above it, right? And that goes back to the power struggle. Anyway, that being aside, I personally think while all this was going on, maybe even it was the Kaepernick and the, quotes that Trump said after that. I think Butler went very cordially to Belichick, said, hey, coach, I want to have a discussion with you. And I think in that discussion one-on-one, I think Malcolm Butler spoke his heart and spoke his mind saying, Bill, what are you doing, man? Your team is half black, right? You have I'm the leader of the defense. Our defense, which is what Belichick prides himself on, is essentially, led by black athletes. The offense was always, Brady, the white receivers, black running backs. But again, the offense was more white. But that defense, there was, I can't even think of like 5 white Patriots defenders who were good. They were all black, right, from the day. Bruschi's probably the one exception. But point being, I think he said, look, you pride yourself on defense. Defense is half the reason you're winning these Super Bowls. Obviously, Brady and the offense, the other half. Like, what's going on? Like, let's come to an agreement. Let's stop. And again, going back to who Bill Belichick is, I think that upset him so much that somebody would call him out on that. Maybe he called him a racist. Maybe he called him a bigot. Whatever he said, I think it happened at a point where Belichick was already hearing a lot of this from other people, and that just sent him over because that's the only theory that, to me, that makes sense. I'm obviously willing to hear other explanations. How can you keep somebody? That's why they lost the Super Bowl, right? They did not lose the Super Bowl because of Tom Brady. He put up 505 yards, which is a record. He put up 33 points. And that was the most points that any team had scored in a Super Bowl loss. It's since been eclipsed by your Philadelphia Eagles against the Chiefs a year ago, 38-35. But prior to that, 35-31, Dallas Cowboys, Pittsburgh Steelers back in the 70s. That was the most points scored in a loss. The Patriots scored 33 points. 95% of the time you scored 33 points in a Super Bowl, you're going to win. But you gave up 41 points.
You score 33 points in any game.
Exactly.
99%
so
again,
of the time, theory, I'd love to hear yours, but I think it was something that was very much just set Belichick off the rails. And he's like, I don't care if we lose this game. I've got 5 Super Bowls. You're not going to play in it.
Yeah. So the internet has a ton of theories. So in the documentary, they say it was something personal. Robert Kraft confirms it. It's something personal between Belichick and Malcolm Butler. The internet, if you go on Reddit, there's all kinds of theories. One is that Butler had a bad week of practice. One that he was, which is BS. One is that he was caught smoking weed in his hotel room. Also BS. If Bill Belichick doesn't care about murders, he's not going to care about smoking weed in a hotel room. The other one was that he had an Instagram model in his room. Sure. Again, same kind of theory. Another one was that Butler was involved with a member of Bill Belichick's family.
Interesting.
Was romantically involved.
Sure.
So that's all out there on Reddit. I don't know. I don't know which of those is true, but it's all out there. But at the end of the day is, if Malcolm Butler is out there, he's making at least one play that one of those guys did not make, whether it's, an Aguilar or Clement or one of those big plays down the field, he's going to be there instead of the backup or the backup to the backup. Yeah. And he would have made a play because he's a good cornerback. And what's funny is that I think he leaves the following year
Yeah.
to Tennessee,
Yeah.
and he ends up coming back to New England. So it's like, how personal and how serious was this crime that he committed that he was benched for the biggest game of his life, or one of the biggest games of his life, but he's still able to come back a few years later. So it's all a very strange situation. One of those great mysteries. Maybe
He
Bill
won't.
Belichick. Well, Bill Belichick won't say it, but maybe maybe Malcolm Butler, like after Belichick dies or something, he'll write a book. I don't know. I think he is writing a book. Again, I'm seeing stuff
I
on
would
Reddit. I
I
don't
would
know
read
what's
that
true and
book
what's
for
not,
sure because I want to
but there's a
know.
lot out there. Alrighty. So the last episode, actually, in this episode, in episode 9, they also talk about
Yeah.
the trade of Jimmy Garoppolo, I believe, to the San Francisco 49ers. Kind of gloss over that, of Belichick losing that power struggle where he loses out on his next Golden Boy quarterback. They do him a favor, send him to San Francisco, good team, whatever. That's over. The Jimmy Garoppolo saga in New England is done. So, episode 10, Endgame. After a decades-long run, the dynasty crumbles. So this episode is about primarily about the Super Bowl in 2019, where they go back to back, or sorry, not back to back, but they make back to back appearances. They beat the Rams in a miserable affair, one of the worst Super Bowls, one of the worst games I've watched, period. They win 13-3. I have a funny story about this. Is my apartment at the time, we were having power issues, and my power went out, and I missed the only touchdown
That's funny.
in that Super Bowl. It was out for like 10 minutes. We had to,
Right.
reflip the fuses, all that stuff. But it was
Yeah.
just funny to me that this awful game, I missed the one highlight play. It's not even a highlight. It's a 2-yard
Right.
goal line dive by Sony
Right.
Michel. So not even a big play. But anyway, Bill Belichick is the driving force behind that Super Bowl. They hold an incredible offense to 3 points. They completely nullify that incredible Rams offense, who, to be fair, was missing Cooper Kupp at the time. So it was a big thing. But basically, it wraps up with Tom Brady saying, you know what? I won this Super Bowl. The next year, he throws a pick six, and it's just a miserable end to his experience there. He decides, I need something different. I want to win with joy, according to his sister, is what she says in the episode. He goes to Tampa with the anti-Belichick and Bruce Arians, who is different than Belichick in every single way. They win a Super Bowl in dominant fashion, despite not being the division winner. So they go on the road. They're the Wild. It's a very different experience. And I think that run answered a lot of questions about Tom Brady. We can talk about that a little bit. But basically, was Belichick really the reason for all the misery that they talked about in New England?
It's easy to put him as the face because, again, he's not the nicest of guys, and I say that sarcastically, right? He's just not a nice person. But I mean, for Tom Brady, man, 20 years of doing this league, it takes its toll. There's a reason why the average NFL career is, I think, less than 6 seasons, right? For quarterbacks, maybe a little more, but he's basically played at this point 3 Hall of Fame careers, if you will. By 2 by this point. I mean, you get the third in Tampa if you want to count it. But yeah, at this point, he is like, he's older, he's doing that. So I think number one, it was more just age, but it's easy to blame Belichick for that. But to be fair, Belichick did not do anything to create that joy in the locker room. He just didn't, right? Because he's all about business, right? He's all about business. He's like, yep, what have you done for me lately? And maybe Tom was looking for a little more, praise. I don't think Tom Brady was a narcissist or a attention seeker. But dude, I've won 6 Super Bowls at this point. Give me a little praise. I'm not saying cut me slack, but acknowledge what I'm doing there. I do want to mention one thing though. Kind of off topic is that Super Bowl to me was Belichick's kind of last, FU moment to Brady, in the sense that, hey Brady, look, you scored 33 points last year. You had an all-world game. Everybody's talking about you, and we lost. This year we're going to do it my way. I'm going to, put this second coming of the greatest show on turf. I'm going to lock them down. You're going to have a pretty bad game as it goes. Tom Brady was not good in that game. I think it was the running game, right, that did more than him. And he didn't even have a touchdown, right? The touchdown, like you said, was a run by Michel. And you're going to score 13 points, our offense, and we're going to win by 10, right? So that was Belichick's last way to be like, look, Tom, I don't need you. Any quarterback could have won that game for me as a Super Bowl. And it's interesting, right? Because at the end of the day, Belichick probably, blew the game against the Eagles, comes back and does this, but it's just Belichick's way of being, a defensive-minded coach at the end. It's like, Tom Brady, great, put up these numbers. Sometimes you win, sometimes you don't, but I don't need you. And I think Brady also, that was probably the least joy he had in winning that Super Bowl, even though it brought 20 years together, right? We beat the Rams the first time, you beat them again. even in that celebration trophy presentation, he's smiling, but you can tell he's just like, man, it was probably the saddest he's been after winning the Super Bowl compared to the first, second, third, fourth, and fifth. And so, yeah, so I do think Belichick deserves the blame as the face, but I also think the documentary basically was very happy to just paint the picture that Belichick's this horrible guy when there's probably other factors as well that you can think of. But to that point, yeah, it's like, let's make him the scapegoat, if you will. He probably deserved a lot of blame, but it's easy to just make him the scapegoat and no one else.
Yeah. Yeah. And let's come back to that for sure. So I think one of the big questions that people have after this dynasty was over was ultimately who was more responsible for the success of the dynasty. I mean, I've talked about this on a previous pod. It's a very vanilla answer, but to me, it's peanut butter and jelly, right? Without one of those ingredients, it's not the same thing. And I think there's different Super Bowls where you can point to and say, all right, Tom Brady was the driving force behind that particular win, right? Maybe the first two, it's all the defense. The third one against the Eagles, all right, that was Brady in the offense, and so on and so forth. You can kind of parse through them, and especially the last one was definitely all Belichick and the defense. And I just think that looking at like the football reference pages of the Patriots, you can see that Tom Brady just about every year had either a top 10, top 5,
right,
or top 1 defense in the NFL. And that's a luxury that no other quarterback in NFL history has been afforded over his career. And obviously he's able to take advantage of short fields. He's able to take advantage of all that. Everything else was handled, special teams, all the other details, completely ironed out for him to just be able to focus on the offense. He's still the GOAT. And on the other side of it, we know that Belichick, we've seen quarterbacks still matter. Maybe in 1995, he could have won a Super Bowl with a Mac Jones level quarterback, but in this era of football, he's not able to do that without an elite high level quarterback. So again, it's a boring answer for me. I don't know about you, but to me, it's like 51-49, maybe more Brady because he's the one actually going out there and doing it. But there's still two other phases of the game that Bill Belichick is handling. So
great point. I think if you asked me this question at the end of his Patriots time, I would say 100% agree. It's probably half and half. I think the tiebreaker has to go to Brady because then he won in his first season in Tampa. To be fair, he had a stacked team as well, right? He had a very good team. It was COVID, so it was a little kind of a weird year. I don't think it deserved an asterisk draw. But to me, what stands out twice is those last two seasons when he won the Super Bowl. So not that middle one where he threw the pick six against the Titans, but the Rams Super Bowl, the game before that, AFC Championship in Kansas City, right, which was the first of that streak of all those AFC Championship games that they hosted. They didn't host it this year, but they still played in it, where Tom Brady, Patrick Mahomes, mano a mano, Tom Brady comes out on top, right? That was a high-scoring game, right? So that was not a defensive battle at all. I think the Patriots won 37-31 in overtime, so it's clearly not a Bill. Yeah,
all thanks to D Ford.
Yep, offsides again, right? Wrong place, wrong time, right place, right time if you're the Patriots. So that to me, and then of course the 31-9 win in the Super Bowl, first Super Bowl to be held at home, but there wasn't really a home field advantage because there was nobody in the stands, right? That was the COVID one. If you think about it,
I think there was like
right.
15 or 20,000. It was mostly like,
right? But very interesting to think.
Yeah.
Those two games, right? Tom Brady has 7 titles because he wins that one. Patrick Mahomes right now has 3. If those two games go the other way, one of them is a Super Bowl and one of them is an AFC Championship. I think maybe earlier in the year, in the year, the highest scoring game in history, 54-51, where the Rams beat the Chiefs on Thanksgiving week, a Monday night game. I think Mahomes gets revenge on that one. And then if he wins against Brady, then you're at 5-5 right now. To answer your question, if you had asked me this question before, I would say half and half, but I got to give the credit because look at what Bill Belichick did with Mac Jones. Mac Jones is no longer a New England Patriot, right? He had Cam Newton. Granted, it was a washed up Cam Newton, but still, Cam Newton can play, right? The Patriots have not won a playoff game since Brady left, right? Let alone, even get to a Super Bowl. They haven't won a single playoff game. They've gone into the playoffs, I think, once, lost to the Bills by 30 a couple of years ago. And Tom Brady's won a Super Bowl without Bill Belichick. So to me, that's always going to be Tom Brady having the advantage. But I will say with confidence, Tom Brady does not win 6 Super Bowls in New England without Bill Belichick. I can say that with confidence.
1,000%. Yeah, that's fair. And in that run, I mean, with Tampa, he goes into Green Bay, beats Aaron Rodgers, He
New
goes into, I
Orleans.
forget the
Yep.
order, but he goes
Yep.
into New Orleans and beats,
Yep.
kind of a little
Yep.
more washed up Drew Brees, but he still beats Drew Brees. And I think at this point he has more
He
NFC
does.
playoff wins
He does.
than Aaron Rodgers does. I think
It is.
so. It's kind of funny, like
Yeah. And then
he just
beating
answered a lot of
Mahomes,
questions.
who's not the
And
Mahomes we
again,
know him,
if he
but that
had,
Mahomes still had a Super Bowl because he was the defending
yes,
champion, beating the Niners the year before. Yep.
correct,
Right.
yeah, it was Mahomes without an
True.
offensive line, so but still, Tom Brady, it just works out for him. He's been touched, man. It's just anything he touches turns to gold, and he won his second Super Bowl, or his Super Bowl there. And I think after that,
Yep.
the GOAT conversation was already over. Now the GOAT conversation is,
Sure.
even more over than it was before. And then he wins that tiebreaker over Bill Belichick. So I think the final question before we wrap up here is, why was this documentary so anti-Belichick? I didn't understand it was almost vindictive in its nature, again, from Robert Kraft to paint. And I think it started from the beginning where they kind of glossed over all of the successes. They barely talked about the Panthers Super Bowl.
Yeah.
I don't even think they mentioned the Eagles Super Bowl. And it was just a very strange tone of almost like if it bleeds, it leads type of a narrative where they just talked about the bad stuff that happened and they didn't give any credit to him. They kind of hint at, he was the reason for the focus and blah, blah, blah. And, it's all good vibes in the beginning. And then it just turns sour in that Aaron Hernandez and the Deflategate episode. But why do you think it was so anti-Belichick?
Thank you for mentioning that the Crafts did have a couple of, executive producer credits and stuff. The only opinion I have, and again, it's a theory, is I truly think as much winning as Belichick brought to that organization and that franchise, it was never joyful, like even for the Crafts, right? I think dealing with Belichick, I'm sure Kraft had tons of meetings with him, right? Probably just did not get to the point. To me, what happened this week, I'm so glad we're having the podcast now. If you saw that article on ESPN, Robert Kraft basically told Arthur Blank, former owner of Home Depot, owner of the Atlanta Falcons, who basically the job was Belichick's, right? He was doing a reference check, and Robert Kraft essentially tells him, don't hire this guy, right? And it goes away. They end up hiring, I think, Raheem Morris or somebody else. Point being, it was clearly so vindictive, I think, coming from the Crafts. They just didn't trust him. They didn't like him. And I think it's probably because maybe all these scandals that happened under him, maybe there was a power struggle between Kraft and Belichick. We only focus on the power struggle between Brady and Belichick, right? But I'm sure there's owner-coach chink. I know all about it. I've been seeing it the last 30 years in Dallas with Jerry Jones, right? And I think for Robert Kraft, he was probably like, dude, enough is enough, man. 20 years of this guy. With Jerry Jones, if he doesn't like somebody, you're fired, right? Next man up. There's been 10 coaches in Dallas in the time Bill Belichick has been in New England. So I think it was a way of the Crafts wanting to get the last word. And it's that joke, right, that I always say. This is billionaire talk, right? When owners are talking, Bill Belichick is a very rich man, but he's a millionaire. He's not a billionaire, right? Tom Brady is a millionaire, not a billionaire. So this is just add a few zeros, man. And for them, it's like, we are billionaires. We are masters of the universe. We have all the power. Anybody that even threatens to challenge that, we're going to get you. And this is the Crafts way of being like, this is the last laugh. And it's funny enough, if you thought the documentary was the last laugh, I doubt if Bill Belichick ever coaches in the NFL again. I really do. Because at the end of the day, the owner has to support the decision. And owners are going to probably call Kraft, and Kraft's going to stand firm. He's going to be like, now maybe time will heal that, but Bill Belichick's not getting any younger. The guy's 73, I think. So, hire a 73-year-old coach. I think Sean McVay, these young guys are proving that you go young, right? So, yeah, so I think that's my theory, is that this is just the last word that the Crafts want to get in and say, like, Belichick, thank you for the 6 Super Bowls, but don't let the door hit you on the way out.
Yeah, exactly. It's the billionaire ego. It's, all right, I'm sick and tired. Okay, I'll accept that Brady's going to get a ton of credit because I love him like a son. He calls him Tommy. They kiss each other on the lips. It's a very weird relationship. So he's okay with that. He's like, all right, Brady is my inferior. He's always going to be, because he's my player. He calls me Mr. Kraft. It's always a deference, a respect. He probably didn't get that respect from Belichick. Belichick probably cuss up a storm, call him Bob, Rob, whatever the hell. So it was an ego thing, 100,000%. He was sick and tired of Belichick getting all the credit. So he said, I'm going to fund this documentary to tell my story and tear down this guy who is ultimately responsible for all the success that my team has had. But because I'm the billionaire and I'm the one writing the checks, I'm the one that's going to sit up here and say, no, it was actually me. You know, he doesn't say it explicitly, but it's like, no, it was Tommy and it was me. And Bill Belichick was the bad guy. And I saw a tweet recently where I think it was in response to the Falcons thing. It's like, you know, for 20 years, we kept wondering, you know, if Bill Belichick was the villain in this Patriots story. And we find out at the end of the day, it's Bob Kraft. And I think this documentary basically seals that. And it's a shame. You know, honestly, I'm not a Belichick guy. I'm not a fan of his coaching tree. They've not worked out because they've all tried to pretend to be him. They're doing their best Bill Belichick impression. I think he's one of one, just like Tom Brady is one of one. There will never be another coach like him that's able to win in the way that he did, at the level that he did. You know, and I can't believe I'm sitting here. I'm wearing my Raiders hat and I'm sitting here defending Bill Belichick.
Right.
And I think it's just gotten crazy where people are like, he's not a good coach. It's all Tom Brady. I'm like, you guys are insane to say that. And it's insane to me that he doesn't have a job. It's insane to me that the Falcons looked at Raheem Morris, all respect to him, or the Cowboys looked at Mike McCarthy and whatever and just said, you know what? We don't need the greatest coach of all time because he's kind of a pain in the ass. And it just goes to show you it's just a new era of the NFL and all that. So any final thoughts before we wrap up, man? This was
great,
this was awesome.
It's
but
awesome
any final
that
thoughts?
A Raiders fan and a Patriots fan can kind of have a talk on it and agree on something, right? Which is great. But no, this was great. I mean, I think I will say this, you know, the documentary definitely brought back a lot of joyful memories and painful memories, I think, for all of us. But at the end of the day, man, you know, I think what we saw in New England over the last 20 years, I personally don't think can be replicated. I'm a little nervous of what's going on in Kansas City, to be fair. You know, they are, I mean, I don't think anybody had them winning again, right? I mean, they got in, we'll see. If they win this year, man, I'm going to start sweating. I'll say that. I mean, that'll be 4, right? 4 and 6 years. I mean, that's the only thing I can think of. But, you know, kudos to them. It was a great run. But going back to the Patriots, amazing. You know, Tom Brady, man, right place, right time. And I think, to be honest, getting drafted 199 in the 6th round probably just was the best thing that ever could have happened to him, because it just made him have that chip on his shoulder, right? Forever, right? And so I'm thinking, this guy, man, just the perennial underdog, right? Turning into a favorite. It's Hollywood couldn't have written a better script. But yeah, definitely think there was hidden agendas, which I'm glad we were able to kind of uncover in that documentary. Enjoyed this podcast a lot, and look forward to future collaborations with you.
Yeah, of course, man. Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody, for listening. We appreciate you guys. Make sure to follow, subscribe, leave us a review wherever you're listening to this podcast, and hit that subscribe button if you're watching us on YouTube. Thanks all. Thanks.